Your Excellency, thanks for joining the Global Recast. So, for context, the world has never been more divided. We live in a fractured world, and many believe it's a crisis of leadership, from corporate boardrooms to multilateral institutions, and from the ivory towers to the political campaign trail. We are seeing a common trend: fatigue, burnout, confusion. Simply put, many leaders are out of their depth. As you know, one of the reasons I launched this initiative is to pay attention and give a unique lens of inquiry to courage and grit on the part of global leaders. And based on evidence, women's participation and leadership in political and public life are very important, very key for stability, prosperity, and broadly speaking, in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So to help us make sense of our volatile world, particularly in the context of power and the gender aspect, I can't think of anyone more qualified than you, given your impressive accomplishments in academia, politics, entrepreneurship, and global development. So I'm so happy to have you here. But before we dive in, please introduce yourself quickly for the benefit of our listeners.
Thanks for associating me with this event. I am Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, and I'll just start by the latest office I held, which was, of course, the office of the President of the Republic of Mauritius. I was sworn as the sixth president in June of 2015. But prior to this, I was an entrepreneur. And prior to that, I was a university professor, where I became the first woman professor in my university. And I climbed the academic ladder and administrative ladder. I became dean of the faculty. I became the deputy vice chancellor. And then I took my retirement from the university, and I used my research findings to set up a company. And I must point out here that the ecosystem to set up companies right from academia didn't exist. It still doesn't. So I took the risk of going into the unknown, and I'm very pleased I did. So that's in a very short summary of what I have done. And now, as I'm out of office, I'm doing a great deal towards the empowerment of girls, because I think I have been the beneficiary of this from the vision of my parents, who have pushed me to have an education. And of course, they became my best cheerleaders. So I want to do a lot to empower girls, and more importantly, to advocate for the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Africa, because Africa needs it more than perhaps any other continent, because we have so many graduates landing in the job market and too few jobs to go between. So we really have to encourage them to go down the pathway of entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for that. So the first question here is looking at the nexus between gender and global leadership. Compared to men, women are vastly underrepresented at virtually all levels of political leadership, particularly elected positions. So given your unique role as someone who has been at the highest level of political leadership, what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks for this question. Whenever we talk about leadership, we only focus on political leadership. If I use my own country as a microcosm of the world, since independence, we have seen gradually the feminization of many professions. We have seen feminization here in my country, the feminization of the medical sector, the judicial sector. We are seeing increasingly feminization of many other sectors. Granted that the political world there is still a lot of underrepresentation. And I take the latest general election, which was had last week, and we have seen the swearing in of women in government. We are still seeing, of course, not even the quota, which is, of course, the 30%. We're not talking about parity. So we're still far behind. But let us take these sectors which are feminizing. And when I look at the political world, I still think that it is work in progress. And why this has happened? This has happened because of one fundamental we brought in the space, and this fundamental is access to education. And access to free education in Mauritius became available in 1976. And why it mattered? Because it became free for one and all. And at some point, culturally, it made more sense to educate the boy, because culturally, again, the boy will look after the family when the woman gets married off. And again, I was kind of out of the equation because I was a woman, but I managed to get education, as I said earlier on, because of the vision of my parent. So once education became free for all, women got access to it, and women knew the rights and, of course, the responsibilities. But the political world remains the orphan till date. Again, this is, of course, applies only to Mauritius. But having said this, if we look at the wider African continent, and again, we juxtapose this to a country like United States, we juxtapose this to a region like the European Union, we still find that Africa is doing quite well. Africa has had 6 women leaders, at president level, and many prime ministers. I mean, there are so many, and of course, many vice presidents as well. So it's easy to kind of slot Africa and many other countries in the global south as having issues with women leadership. And yet I think we find it is the global north that have issues with women leadership more than the global south. In fact, if you look at some of the major countries, the global south, we find India, for example, that has had prime ministers, women. Pakistan, a country which has maybe all the negatives stacked against it, had the very first woman president, prime minister, and Indonesia, and all these countries. So I think it will be too general to just say that this kind of issue remains with the global south. I think it is more an issue of the global north than the global south.
No, very, very well said, And as always, I mean, there's a need to not overgeneralize, or the fallacy of generalization. And in particular, when you pick Rwanda, I mean, in Africa, that's usually, though not an exemplar per se, given the history and all of that, but you find that in their political chambers and in the corporate world, women seem to rank fairly, equally with their male counterparts, but very, very well.
Better. They are over 53%.
Yeah, I do agree, So that provides a sort of a very good segue to the next question.
If you look at the emergence of a country like, now that you have mentioned Rwanda, if you look at the emergence of this country, when I talk about post-1994, because we know that genocide happened in 1994, we have seen that the leadership there had, in fact, prioritized women leadership. I mean, the question that we can pose here is that the nexus that was needed to get Rwanda out of absolute poverty, and of course, drive the economy, because we know that when the economy grows, the population does better, the population fares well. And I think we can also juxtapose the female leadership to actually reduction of poverty and empowerment of the general population, on the move. So this is something that we really have to flag in when we talk about women leadership. There is a nexus of reducing poverty when women are empowered, because when women are empowered with jobs, when empowered with, be able to manage their economy, the family thrives. And when the family thrives, the children get education, the children get fed. So I think this is something we have to flag in whenever we talk about women leadership and why women matter to be at the table, because when she's there, she really does influence decision-making, and this decision-making, of course, impacts the family, impacts the society, and of course, impacts the country at large.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very well said. I want to move on to another key issue, global governance. I mean, there's a lot happening right now. And as I look at it, it's very obvious that the rules-based international system is broken. Global governance is in peril. I mean, from global inequality to the crisis in Ukraine, Russia, and the Middle East, a major shift in global governance is needed to tackle many of these issues. So, in your opinion, I'm going to be very specific and direct here. In your opinion, what should global leaders do differently to help enhance global governance capabilities and perhaps move us out of this mess? What should leaders do differently?
You know, the institutions that we have running the world right now, I mean, it started developing in 1994. 1944, sorry, 1944, when we had the setting up of the IMF and we had eventually the World Bank. And these multilateral institutions, they were set up really from the ashes of the Second World War, right? And if you look at an institution like the United Nations, the executing body will be the United Nations Security Council. And at that time, it was, of course, the 5 permanent members, of course, with veto power. And we've have right now, as we speak now, 2 members, which were, of course, the major colonial powers, England and France. And these two countries with veto power, they were there representing most of the world. Time. And the organization was set up, UN was set up, of course, to address peace in the world. And they managed to do that somehow. But now that the world is changing, we find that in terms of GDP, we have the 7 countries, which of course include many of the colonial powers in the past. They've had now a GDP which is inferior to the BRICS. The BRICS has taken over the world in terms of GDP output. And in terms of population, we find that they represent over 60% of the world population. So the question arises now as to, is that organization still fit for purpose to run the world? Because they do not represent the world. They do not represent the entirety of the world. Because if you add up the population of all these countries which are at the UN Security Council, we find that they do not exceed 30%. So the big question is that organization still fit for purpose to address the global governance issue? Because already many countries are now saying, the emerging powers, the emerging regions are saying that it is no longer fit for purpose. It was there, as I said, designed to address peace. But now we have many other challenges. We have challenge of climate change. We have challenge of poverty, inequality, security, food security, energy security. All these, I mean, they are not fit for purpose. And increasingly, many parts of the world are saying that the world is bigger than the P5. So what is happening is that there has been, of course, a lot of resistance for countries within the Security Council to cede or to add membership. Recently, there has been talk about including 2 members of Africa, whom we don't know, but with no veto power. So the issues remain the same. And so people are also questioning, can 1 or 2 countries within the United Nations Security Council hold the world hostage to major issues happening in the world? You mentioned Ukraine, you mentioned the Middle East. We have seen, I mean, recently as last week, how the United Nations vetoed a decision in Palestine, 14-1. I mean, these questions, I mean, it really irks what you have referred to as the global South or the rest of the world as to the legitimacy of such decisions. Now, because of the fact that the world is changing, the world is in full mutation, And there is a lot of intransigence at the level of what we call the global north or the international community, as increasingly being referred to, and yet they represent only 12% of the world population. I mean, people are reorganizing themselves. And now we are seeing the emergence of the BRICS, especially in the wake of the fact that, for example, Russia had been cut off the SWIFT. We are seeing a change in the way people are transacting. So it really makes people wonder to where the world will lead, because we are going to see more and more challenges to the supremacy of the global north.
Thanks for that analysis. I still would like you to be specific, though, maybe one or 2 points on the latter part of the question with regards to global leaders. Can you point on one or two things that should be done differently? You've sort of given the overall perspective, and the evolution, since after World War II, the Bretton Woods institutions, and the dynamics, that we've seen over the last several decades. But one or two quick points that you think these are things that could be done differently.
We have many systems operating across the world. We've had some countries where we had liberal electoral system. But unfortunately, in many parts of the world, we are going towards what is increasingly referred to as electoral autocracy. And electoral autocracy, I'll just explain. I'll just take one example. We have election, people vote. And then what we find that the people will start questioning, where is my vote? Because I voted for this issue, and yet when these people are at the head, the leaders, they just ignore the people, right? So people are asking themselves the question, am I just a vote bank? Why should I go and vote when, whatever we wish for as when we actually cast our vote in a democratic system, we are not being listened to. That's one thing which I think is the feeling which is cutting right across many countries. Then the issue of, I can pick on some of the pertinent issues, which is increasingly coming to the fore, the issue of inequality, the issue of income distribution, the issue of economic distribution, because we find that countries, let's take, for example, the global north, the North America, for example, we find the disparity between the have and the have-not is getting bigger and bigger. It is not resources which is lacking, it's the distribution of these resources for those that they have-nots, as we say. So people are challenging all this, and we find that the leaders are not responding to the needs of the people. So this is where I think, for me, whenever we talk about insecurity, we talk about, global terrorism, this, that, and the other. I don't think this is the case. The issue which is going to challenge countries, which is going to take people on the street, will be the economics and the distribution, the inequality. And now with the availability, of course, with the ubiquity of social media, people are seeing things and getting access to information. And you can try and censor it. It is, again, something which goes against constitution of many countries. And people are challenging this, and they are demanding their rights more and more. And if leaders do not listen to this genuine cry out for their rights, for their dues, I think this is going to be the cause for a lot of insecurity across the world.
Highly, highly instructive. Thank you again. Thank you for that. And you also did mention BRICS. Obviously that's an important block. As you know, emerging markets, increasingly, they are really punching above their weight, whether in economics or in global political economy. So that's sort of set the context for the next question, And I like to sort of do a comparison between the G7, and the BRICS economies, as it were. The global economy is under intense competition between those two blocks, the G7 and the BRICS. And some see the competition as a fight for global dominance between, on the one hand, the G7 under the leadership of the United States, in the global north. And on the other hand, some see the BRICS group led by China in the global south, as the other competing bloc. So my question to you is, as a global leader, who again is very informed about all of these issues, the dynamics and another aspect, there's then a hollow middle, as I like to call it. You have a bunch of countries, that do not belong to either blocs. They don't belong to the G7, and they are not part of the BRICS group. How do you think those countries should see global diplomacy, in terms of fighting for their own interests, ensuring that this global system is equitable, is just, and it may also appear they don't really also belong to the class of countries that we call middle power, right? So they can't really leverage niche diplomacy, as it were. For those sort of countries, how should they approach diplomacy and how should they play with key actors in those two groups that I just alluded to?
That reminds me of at some point there was the countries which formed the non-aligned movement. They didn't want to be part of the North. They wanted to be in the middle, not to be with the Russia, the USSR at the time, or the America. They wanted to be independent in their policy. Globally, when you talk about the BRICS, I mean, they are coming together with the purpose of, getting out of the hegemonic attitude of some countries in the global north, especially the United States. They want to grow. They want to look after their own people. In fact, if you look at a country like China, China has risen, and here we must posit that very, very carefully. China has started opening up since 1978. It still remains a communist country. Communism, whether it's capitalist communism, that's another debate. And China has moved from a very poor base, from a very poor economy in 1978-79 to become the biggest economy in purchasing power parity. Now, it did that without actually going to war, for example. They never killed anybody. They did all that. And I think one way they did that, if you look at the way China has emerged, over 40 years, China closed itself onto itself and built its own economy. They don't burn the money. They don't burn the resources in wars. They don't engage by antagonizing people. They engage by working with surrounding countries. And their attitude has been that we can become strong, but we need to look after countries around us. And that's what they did. And this is when, of course, at some point, China joined the ASEAN group. And ASEAN group, we know that it's the second biggest bloc after the European Union. I may be digressing, but I'm not. I'll come to the point, is that now what about those countries which are not members of BRICS? Now, if you look at a continent like Africa, the biggest trading partner for Africa is China. Go back 50 years ago, the biggest trading partner at the time was Europe, for example. And there was, of course, the United States, the global north. They were the trading partners with Africa. Now, what has changed is that the facility with which these countries could trade with China believes very much, I mean, I will use a term which people may not agree, very much the Westphalian approach. They believe in the sovereignty of countries. They don't interfere with countries. They also have a diplomacy which is quite unique in as much as they want to work with partners to build infrastructure, for example, through the Belt and Road Initiative. And China is building with partnership with many of these countries, including those countries which are not part of the BRICS. And I get the feeling that China doesn't want to become the world hegemon. They don't want to lead the world. I think the main priorities of China right now, and I think for a few more years, is to improve the livelihoods of its own people and also build with other countries to improve their livelihood. So it's a totally different approach. It is not through the barrel of a gun that China wants to emerge. It has emerged without being there behind the barrel of the gun. So it's a different approach, but there's no doubt that the world is changing. The world increasingly will not be a multipolar world, will be increasingly a fragmented world. And I think this is where the danger lies, because some countries are very keen on being hegemonic, and other countries have said, no, we don't want to be under the power of this hegemon. We want to emerge in our own right. And we believe in trade. We believe in developing our own resources. We believe in transforming our resources for the betterment of our own people. So it's a question. We are here right now at this juncture where the whole system of global leadership is changing, because the virtues and the values of all these countries are changing fast. And at the end of the day, what matters is the interest, because in political world, there are no friendship, but there's interest.
No, excellent, excellent. The key takeaway there, is as Riley said, uh, doesn't seem like there's anything that will stop the fragmentation that we are seeing. And I also like your take on the need or the desire, on the part of other countries to pursue their interests and leverage trade, investment, other international commercial engagements to drive their agenda. Very, very beautifully said. I'm going to pivot to another quick issue, which is not really in the mainstream of global governance per se, but I think it's also important now that I have you on the show, and that's the topic of ESG, the so-called environmental, social, and governance factors. You find that in the corporate world or even in industrial policy, led by government agencies and what have you, it's becoming increasingly controversial, particularly when you look at the trend in the last 5 years, since after the pandemic. When COVID happened, it was so sudden. Many leaders weren't really prepared. They had to sort of look for emergency solutions. But hey, it's coming to about 5 years now, or yeah, since COVID happened. And it does appear that there have been many other issues, that have come up since then, leading to intense difficulty, and other challenges and uncertainty. You take that back to the ESG issue. Even though current evidence is mixed, some pundits, politicians, and experts believe that the excessive focus on ESG has introduced some bottlenecks, and in some ways, some argue that this could lead to mediocre financial returns, or when you look at other performance metrics. I know it's fairly controversial, and I also know it's largely driven by ideology or other persuasions. But again, as a global leader who has worked across different spheres, academia, entrepreneurship, and politics, how do you see it? ESG, what's your take?
ESG initially sounded like a good idea when it originated from the UN Global Compact in 2004 and grown from a CSR into a thriving market and a priority for modern corporation and enterprise. The world has on the company's value and shareholding. So all this is not, it's not sitting easily with many people. And this is one of the reasons why I think ESG is not taking off, because if it does not have standard metrics to apply to everybody, I don't think it will apply, it will fly, unfortunately. However, as I said, the initial narrative sounded good for the benefit of all, environment, social, the equity, and governance, but it is not flying that. It's increasingly being looked upon as just a PR exercise.
Okay, and because you are, thank you, and because you are very, very active on the continent in Africa, you know, and of course in the global north, but on the continent of Africa, when we talk about ESG, what comes to mind? Are there things that countries in Africa or Asia or Latin America, you know, countries in the global south, are there unique perspectives that they need to bring into the ESG conversation? Or do you think the current landscape where much of the direction, the best practices, and what have you, the way those things are being led or prescribed from the north, you think that's a sustainable trend, or are there things that could be done differently?
You know, for the African continent, unfortunately, the perception still remains in the global north that Africa is a continent where we extract resources. We extract raw material to be shipped quickly out for the benefit of the global north and corporations in the global north. Now, if you look at just two letters in the ESG, we talk about environment and we talk about governance. I'll just be very blunt here. How many corporates in operating in Africa pay the taxes? That's a question. How many do they actually pay? The basic taxes, and we have seen what's happening in West Africa, where a lot of the companies got in the crosshairs of the countries operating there in the mining sector. So it's all very good to be prescriptive, Fred, but you know it's all will people be respected more if they go by their own standards, if their own oratory in terms of what's good for the environment, what's good for government, what's good for society. And I'm sure a lot of African countries will benefit if these corporates apply really the virtues and the values of ESG. And it's not the case. So this is where people increasingly are referring to ESG as greenwashing.
Okay, I take that. Thank you. And now let's go personal now. Let's bring it back to you. Let's bring it back to you. Again, one of the reasons I started this talk show is really to find a way to magnify the importance of courage, resilience, and grit, you know, on the part of global leaders as we try to analyze real world economic and political outcomes. You know, the untold stories and challenging journeys of these leaders who have gone through a lot, you know, they've had to navigate setbacks before bouncing back, you know. And as we explore what's next for our fractured world, you know, how do we find sustainable solutions to really help restore stability and growth? And I know in your own case, you've had the privilege, you know, of wearing many hats in your illustrious career. And I know it's not always been a linear journey for you. You've had many ups and downs, setbacks, and triumphs. So in light of the discussion so far and what we are trying to really unpack to help move the agenda, are there any experiences or anecdotes, you know, that you'd like to share as a major setback in your life, in your career, helped you to bounce back in any way? Whatever you're comfortable sharing, I really want to hear that side
No,
of your
I'll be
story.
very candid here. You know, I always say that the real success of anybody is the number of time you rise after you have fallen down, right? To me, that's a metric of success. In my personal case, you know, I applied for the post of president of the university, what we call here vice chancellor. And 3 times I feel I had the profile because I ticked all the boxes, you know, research, administration, you name it. I had it, even DSCs at the time. And many of the candidates didn't share these, didn't tick all these boxes. And yet I didn't get it. I applied 3 times, I didn't get it. So I said to myself, look, I'm going to cut my losses here and I'm just going to do something else. And this is when I decided to leave the university and set up my own business. And so I built on negatives. And I took a risk, a big risk, because, when you are in academia, you are in the comfort zone, you're earning a salary, and you can run like this till you retire. And I said to myself, I want to do something different. I want to set up an enterprise. I want to become an entrepreneur. At least one day when I'm very old, I will say, I tried it. I didn't succeed, but I did try it. And I think this is one of the major steps I took into the unknown, really in the Wild West, because as I said earlier on, we didn't have the ecosystem for an academic who has an idea to translate this to an incubator and, of course, develop a business. But I did take the leap I did cross what I said, the valley of death, took my idea on the other side and tried to develop a business. And it's from there that I became president. So I think you have to build on negatives, you have to build on losses, you have to build on failures. And people should not be afraid of failures because, as Einstein has rightly said, if you haven't failed, it means you haven't tried hard enough. So never shy away from failure. In fact, the United States has a good word for it. When you talk about the B word, bankruptcy, it means starting off again on a clean slate. So you should not be afraid of failures. You should build on this. And that's what I did. And I'm very proud I did it because if I didn't do it, I would be speaking to you as a past president. I'd be speaking to you as a probably university professor.
Wow. I don't think I need to push you any further on that. Very well said. Thank you. And the key takeaway there again is never be afraid of failure.
Yes.
That really does resonate. Thanks for that. And I think that brings us to the end of this. But before I let you go, for current and aspiring leaders, for folks who are really aspiring, to global leadership positions, whether in global business or global public policy, global innovation, and who will at some point, listen to this, watch this interview. You just talked about courage and grit, resilience, bouncing back, failures, What would you like to share with them, in terms of being in the global arena, becoming global leaders and leveraging their successes and failures to move the needle? Any parting words for those folks, current and aspiring global
Yes.
leaders?
Yeah, what I would say is that, first of all, believe in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, no one will. So learn to believe in yourself. And if you have an idea, take the risk of developing that idea, wherever that may lead you to. But at least you will not have any regrets, and least of all, any remorse of not having tried. So believe in yourself and just keep forging ahead. Be focused. And don't forget that there is no shortcuts. We have to work hard. So work hard, believe in yourself, remain focused, and just go for it, wherever that may lead you.
Very good. And that does it for this episode. Again, I would like to really thank you for taking the time to join me today to discuss many of the issues that we've just unpacked here. At the end of the day, this show is about bringing global leaders who have, navigated triumphs, setbacks, and successes, their up and downs and their non-linear journeys.
Thank you.